Wembanyama is a European player. They are a bit dirty. It's why beating France in France was such a big deal. Europeans want to own our game, and they are a bit dirty. And so I've said this before, and everybody's like, Draymond shouldn't say that. He can't say that. He's dirty. No, I'm not. I will mess you up for sure because you deserve to get jacked up. Completely different thing than doing sneaky, dirty stuff. They also will fucking clothesline you and the game go on. Let me clothesline somebody. In the 2010s, 20s, let me clothesline somebody. Guess what we gonna do? Call for Draymond head. That's so unsportsmanlike. But now, when the young guys walk off the court, when the Frenchmen walk off the court, you ain't gotta show no sportsmanship.
Victor Wembanyama just lost the NBA Finals, and instead of working his way down the handshake line to congratulate Jalen Brunson, he walked straight off the court. Draymond Green didn't just notice, he went off. But here's what almost nobody is telling you. This tension between Wembanyama and Draymond Green didn't start last week, and it didn't start this season. It's been building for over a year, layer by layer, comment by comment, and it just exploded into something that could shape how both of these men are remembered. If you think this is just two NBA guys trading jabs on a podcast, you are seriously underestimating what's actually going on here. Because what I'm about to walk you through changes how you see both of them. And more importantly, it exposes an uncomfortable truth about Draymond Green that he may not even realize he's revealing. Stay with me, because this goes a lot deeper than the headlines suggest. Let's set the scene first, because context is everything. Victor Wembanyama is 22 years old, and he's already one of the most unique players the league has ever produced. He stands 7'4", with a reported wingspan close to 8 feet, handles the ball like a guard, and has shot-blocking instincts that genuinely don't make sense for someone his size. The Spurs took him first overall in the 2023 draft, and from the moment he stepped onto an NBA court, the basketball world treated him differently, not just with hype, but with something closer to reverence, like they were watching a player who comes along once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime. Draymond Green, on the other hand, is a 4-time NBA champion. He's been the heartbeat of the Golden State Warriors dynasty and one of the most intelligent defensive minds a sport has ever seen. He's also one of the most polarizing figures in professional basketball, and he knows it. He leans into it. So what happens when a generational talent who seems untouchable collides with a veteran who's built an entire career on getting inside other people's heads? You get a rivalry that's been simmering since Wembanyama's rookie year, one that just boiled over in the most public way imaginable. Here's how the timeline actually plays out, because most people are only seeing the latest chapter and missing everything that led up to it. To understand where this stands now, you have to go back to where it started, and it started exactly where you'd expect, with Draymond Green and a microphone. Draymond has never been shy about sharing his opinions. That's basically his brand at this point. Whether it's his podcast, post-game interviews, or live commentary mid-broadcast, Draymond says what he wants, when he wants, and doesn't lose sleep over how it lands. That confidence, that willingness to speak his mind and back it up, is part of what made him a champion 4 times over. You don't win that many rings by being soft, and you don't anchor a dynasty's defense by worrying about hurt feelings. But with Wembanyama, something felt different from the start. Early in his career, Draymond began needling him, not viciously, not over the top, but pointed. There were comments suggesting Wembanyama still needed to prove himself, carefully worded but unmistakable in their meaning, that the hype surrounding him was outpacing his actual production. Draymond, a man who's gone head-to-head with LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Stephen Curry across an entire era, was essentially telling the basketball world to pump the brakes and let the kid earn it. On some level, that's a fair point. Wembanyama was still adjusting to NBA physicality, to the grind of an 82-game schedule, to being the face of a rebuilding franchise with little support around him. Growing pains are normal. No rookie wins every night, no matter how special the talent. But here's the part people tend to overlook. Wembanyama heard every word of it, and this is where most people underestimate him, because his public persona is quiet, almost serene. He speaks thoughtfully and carries himself with a calm that makes him seem like he's operating on a different wavelength than everyone around him. But don't mistake quiet for passive, and don't mistake calm for unbothered.
Wembanyama didn't respond with outrage. He didn't fire off a viral rant or call Draymond out by name in some dramatic press conference. He responded the way the truly dangerous ones always do, by playing, by improving, by putting up numbers that made it harder and harder for anyone, including Draymond Green, to keep questioning him with a straight face. As his game grew, his confidence grew. As the Spurs started building something real around him, the back and forth between them escalated. Draymond kept talking, and Wembanyama made it clear, in his own understated way, that he wasn't going to just absorb the criticism without pushing back. There's a dynamic that plays out between veterans and rising stars that's as old as the sport itself. The veteran tests the newcomer, and the newcomer decides whether to back down or push back. Most young players back down. They stay in their lane, talk about focusing on their craft, and let the veteran have his moment. Wembanyama didn't do that, and that's exactly why this rivalry became what it became.
As the season went on and Wembanyama's name started entering MVP conversations, Draymond's comments didn't go away, they evolved. Draymond has a genuine skill for phrasing criticism, so it sounds almost like praise on the surface while cutting deeper underneath. He'd acknowledge Wembanyama's talent while quietly questioning his toughness, talk about what he could become while implying he wasn't there yet. It was psychological pressure dressed up as basketball analysis, and Draymond has been doing this his entire career. The thing is, it usually works. Veterans have used this tactic on young players forever. Plant a seed of doubt, make them second-guess themselves in big moments, make them feel like they still have something to prove even when they're already proving it. But Wembanyama appears to have an unusual relationship with doubt. He just doesn't seem to carry much of it. Not arrogance. If you've watched him in interviews, arrogance is about the last word you'd use. It's more than he seems genuinely grounded in who he is, both as a player and as a person. He knows what he's building toward, and outside noise doesn't seem to shake that. So while Draymond kept talking, Wembanyama kept doing what he does, blocking shots that defy physics, hitting threes off the dribble with that absurdly long release, making plays that left scouts and analysts searching for historical comparisons that simply don't exist because there's no one quite like him to compare him to. Slowly, people started noticing something else. Draymond Green seemed bothered. Not obviously, not in any way he'd ever admit to, but the frequency of the comments, the specificity of the criticism, the way he kept circling back to Wembanyama even when there were other stories to talk about, started to paint a picture. And that picture would come into sharp focus at the worst possible moment for Victor Wembanyama, the NBA Finals. Let's talk about what actually happened, because this is where things went from a simmer to a full boil. The Spurs made the Finals. Sit with that for a second. Victor Wembanyama, in just his third season, leading San Antonio to the championship round. The player Draymond had spent more than a year picking apart was standing on the biggest stage the sport has to offer. That alone is a statement. But they lost. The New York Knicks, led by Jalen Brunson in what's already being called one of the great individual finals performances in recent memory, closed the series out in 5 games. Their first championship in 53 years. And in that moment, right after the final buzzer, during that agonizing stretch where the losing team has to stand on their own floor while the other side celebrates, Wembanyama made a choice. He didn't go through the handshake line. He walked straight to the tunnel. That moment means different things to different people. Some call it disrespectful. Others see it as raw, unfiltered heartbreak from a competitor who just had the worst night of his career on his own home floor. And it's worth noting this isn't exactly unprecedented. Plenty of players over the years have skipped the full handshake line after a tough loss. The finals are brutal, and losing them is one of the most painful experiences in sports. Not everyone processes that pain the same way. But Draymond Green had a very specific take, and he didn't deliver it quietly. On his podcast, he said Wembanyama needed to look his killer in the face. Sit with that phrase for a second. What Draymond is really saying, once you strip away the dramatic language, is that refusing to acknowledge Brunson after losing to him is a form of weakness, that a true competitor, and Draymond would say he's speaking from experience, faces the person who beat him, looks him in the eye, and acknowledges that on that night, the other guy was better.
And there's a version of this argument that holds up. There's real tradition behind the post-game handshake. It's a form of respect the sport takes seriously, especially after a series that meant this much. But here's where it gets complicated, and where the conversation around Draymond's comments started shifting in a direction he may not have anticipated. Because the same Draymond now lecturing a 22-year-old about sportsmanship is the same Draymond who's been ejected from games, suspended multiple times, including a suspension during the 2016 finals, and involved in more than a few controversial moments of his own, including physical altercations with his own teammates. So when Draymond hands down his verdict on Wembanyama's exit, a lot of people started asking a fair question. Is this genuine wisdom from a veteran who's learned from his own mistakes, or is it something else entirely? Because right around the same time, Draymond went public with another round of comments, and this time the tone shifted a little. He started talking about how Wembanyama gets a pass that he never would. If Wembanyama does something controversial, the handshake snub or anything else, the fans and media largely shrug it off and move on. But if Draymond did the same thing, the reaction would be completely different. He'd be the villain. He'd be trending for all the wrong reasons.
And he's not entirely wrong about that. There is a different standard applied to Victor Wembanyama. Some of it comes from his age. Some of it comes from the enormous goodwill he's built up, the way he carries himself, the thoughtfulness in how he speaks, the quiet composure he projects, even in heated moments. Some of it is simply a fan base that's fallen in love with a once-in-a-generation talent and wants to protect that feeling. But here's the uncomfortable truth buried inside Draymond's complaint. He's not raising this point from a place of principle. This isn't a thoughtful critique of media double standards offered for the good of the broader conversation. The energy behind those comments isn't the energy of someone making a philosophical observation. It's the energy of someone envious. Let's just say it plainly. Draymond Green, four-time champion, Hall of Fame caliber defender, one of the most decorated players of his generation, appears to be envious of Victor Wembanyama. Not necessarily of his talent, and not even of his potential success, because Draymond already has championships that Wembanyama hasn't won yet. It's the grace Wembanyama moves through the world with, the way people root for him unconditionally, the way he can walk off a court without shaking a hand and still be described as just emotional, while Draymond knows that if he did the same thing, it would dominate headlines for weeks as proof of who he really is. That's a specific kind of frustration, the frustration of someone who spent his entire career fighting to be taken seriously, watching someone else seem to command respect almost effortlessly. And instead of sitting with that, instead of asking what years of suspensions and controversy might say about how he shaped his own reputation, Draymond externalizes it. He calls out the double standard. He frames himself as the one being treated unfairly. But the reason there's a different standard isn't that the media favors Wembanyama or is against Draymond. It's because of the track record Draymond has built for himself over more than a decade. The suspensions, the altercations, the moments that were genuinely hard to defend. That reputation was built brick by brick, and now it's the lens through which everything he does gets viewed. Wembanyama is still writing his story. Draymond's story already has chapters that can't be rewritten. Now let's flip this around, because we've spent a lot of time on Draymond and not nearly enough time on what Wembanyama's behavior throughout all of this is actually communicating. He doesn't fire back loudly. He doesn't drop quotes designed to dominate a news cycle. He doesn't call Draymond out by name in press conferences and invite the drama. On the surface, someone not paying close attention might assume he's simply not engaging at all. That would be a mistake. Everything Wembanyama does seems intentional. How he presents himself publicly, how he answers questions, the composure he holds on to even under real pressure. None of that looks accidental. He comes across as someone with a very clear sense of who he is and how he wants to be perceived, and his response to Draymond has been consistent from day one. Don't give him what he wants. And what does Draymond want? Engagement, a reaction, a moment where the young star loses his cool and says something he can't walk back, so suddenly they're equals in the drama. Suddenly it's a real rivalry and Draymond becomes permanently relevant to Wembanyama's story. Wembanyama hasn't given him that. And that silence, that refusal to be rattled, might be the most damaging thing he could do to Draymond.
For someone whose public identity is built around provoking reactions, being treated like you're not worth the energy of a response is its own kind of loss. Think about the back and forths Draymond has had over the years with players like Kevin Durant or Jordan Poole. In every one of those, there was a reciprocal energy, an actual exchange, which kept Draymond at the center of the story. With Wembanyama, he's throwing punches at someone who's simply not swinging back. That doesn't make Wembanyama look weak. If anything, it makes Draymond look like he's fighting an opponent who doesn't view him as a worthy one. A tough spot for a proud veteran to be stuck in. Step back even further, and this rivalry is really about something bigger than two players who don't get along. It's about a generational shift happening in real time. Draymond Green is one of the last standing pillars of an era. The Warriors dynasty, the Splash Brothers, the small ball revolution that changed how the sport is played. That era is winding down. Steph Curry is in the twilight of his career, Klay Thompson has moved on, Draymond is still out there competing and still speaking his mind, but the empire he helped build has faded. Victor Wembanyama represents the start of what comes next. Not just a great player, but a preview of where the sport is headed. Different body types, different skill sets, different possibilities the game has never seen before.
There's a natural friction that builds when an old guard watches a new generation arrive, especially one that arrives with this much ease and is welcomed this warmly, in a way the old guard never quite was. Draymond earned every bit of his respect through toughness, controversy, and championship rings. Wembanyama walked into the league with the red carpet practically rolled out in front of him. That's not Wembanyama's fault, but it's a real dynamic Draymond has to live with. So when Draymond talks about double standards and positions himself as the one being treated unfairly, what he's really doing, whether he fully realizes it or not, is grieving the end of an era while standing at the start of a new one. He poured everything into a particular version of the sport, and now he's watching that version be replaced by something he can't fully compete with, not because he isn't great, but because time eventually outlasts every opponent. Wembanyama isn't trying to replace Draymond. He's barely thinking about him at all, and that's really the whole point. The next generation rarely spends much energy worrying about the one it's stepping past. It just arrives. So where does this go from here? If you think it ends with the offseason, I'd push back on that. Wembanyama is going to come back next season with something to prove, not to Draymond specifically, but to everyone. Losing the finals at 22 is fuel. It's the kind of experience that either breaks a player or forges something dangerous. And based on everything we know about how Wembanyama is wired, his composure, his intelligence, his apparent refusal to let outside noise touch his internal world, it's far more likely to be the latter. The Spurs will keep building around him, chasing the pieces that can push them back to that level and over the top. And when they get there, when Wembanyama is putting up numbers that leave even his harshest critics with nothing left to say, this summer's comments from Draymond are going to look like a footnote, a moment when a great player from a great era tried to write himself into a story that was never really his to tell. Draymond, for his part, will keep talking. That's just who he is, and honestly, it's part of what makes him compelling to watch. He's never going to stop having opinions or pushing back against the narrative, and somewhere in that relentlessness is the same quality that helped make him a champion. He simply doesn't back down. That's admirable, even when it leads him somewhere complicated. But right now, this rivalry is exactly as real as it looks, and it is far from over. Wembanyama is going to keep getting better. Draymond is going to keep talking. And every time their names end up in the same sentence this season, remember this moment, remember this summer, because this is where it all started making sense.